So, back on Wednesday the 26th of April this year, a member of the public was digging in a fielded area on the Coxmoor Road in the Sutton area of Nottingham. Whilst digging, they uncovered what were very obviously human remains. We managed to recover a full DNA profile for the deceased. What we were also able to establish was that the deceased had a number of areas of trauma about their body, and I still do not intend to be any more specific about those injuries, but when you put all of those circumstances together, we announced that this was a murder investigation, and that indeed is exactly what we have been running over the course of that time. Russell, who sits alongside me, was also watching the news, and Russell phoned in to say, I think that could be my grandfather. As a result of some further tests that we undertook, we confirmed that the deceased, who we'd found buried in the ground, was indeed Russell's grandfather, who we now know is Alfred Swinscoe. You can see pictures that we're showing alongside me now, and those will of course be shared with you, and I would urge you to share those pictures please with the public, because they are an integral and important part of the appeal that I'm going to be making this afternoon. Some of Alfred's family are still alive, others have died not knowing what happened to him, because all we know and all they know is that back in 1967 Alfred went out one night and never came home.
So this is a spot, strangely, that you've driven past for years, but you knew nothing.
No, many times back in my youth I've drove by that immediate road behind us, and recently going to work at the top road there, and all the time he's been actually here at this spot here, shouting out to me.
For Russell, a return to an otherwise unremarkable patch of land, but which for him and his family holds huge emotional significance.
There was an appeal put out by the police saying that they found a body here where we stood now, and they was asking, you know, does anybody have any relatives missing? And so I thought, well, I'll take a punt and tell them, which I did.
That relative who was missing was Russell's grandfather, Alfred Swinscoe, missing, vanished without trace since January 1967. Alfred was last seen at a pub in the village of Pinxton in Derbyshire. It wasn't until April 2023, 56 years later, that his remains were found near Sutton-in-Ashfield. A farmer digging a trench discovered them in a shallow grave. Alfred had been stabbed. He'd suffered blunt force trauma injuries. Police have identified two suspects, both now dead. Both have taken their secrets to the grave. The land here has given up its secrets, but the family are still denied the answers they've been craving for all these years. Could this appeal today by Russell, through us, be their last chance to get the breakthrough they so desperately need?
Well, unfortunately, it means now that they cannot be interviewed, so they cannot be proved. So I think all we can basically hope for is that somebody out there knows something, and that maybe they were told on the father's deathbed or mother's deathbed, and they could come forward.
An inquest has opened into Alfred's death. As yet, there's no conclusion, but it's allowed his family to give him, at long last, a decent burial. He was here for so many years, denied the dignity that any of us would expect, but now you've finally given him that final resting place.
Yes, he's got a final resting place. He's actually buried with his family. He's buried on top of his son Gary, and he's immediately next door to his wife Caroline and daughter Carol. I'd like to think he'd be proud of us, you know, for pursuing this and getting him home, where he's been so desperate to be for the last 57 years.
For more than 50 years, a family has been haunted by a mystery.
With Grandad, it was a simple case of here one minute and gone the next. He vanished into thin air.
Alfred Swinscoe had gone for a pint at his local in the Derbyshire mining village of Pinxton. He never came home.
Some breaking news. The police have just named a man whose body was found buried in a farmer's field in Nottinghamshire. He was Alfred Swinscoe.
Alfred's remains were identified by his grandson last year in the most unexpected way.
I looked at the socks and I had this incredible flashback.
Alfred Swinscoe's socks solved one mystery, but unearthed another for his grandson. Who killed him and why? It's an ongoing family tragedy and a murder that's gone unsolved for more than half a century.
I would only be a baby-stroke toddler when Grandad vanished, but I know he was a caring, loving grandfather that always took an interest in his children. He would always admire his grandchildren in the prams, and he would send little notes saying, you know, remember me to our Russell, you know. So I knew he was always a caring person that didn't forget us.
Russell Lowbridge is talking about his granddad, Alfred Swinscoe. Alfred was a coal miner. He went missing in 1967 when he was 54 years old, leaving behind a wife and 6 children. Russell was one of his grandchildren.
The family, in some romantic way, tried to make themselves believe that he'd gone off and made a new life somewhere else, or maybe even with another woman, but my uncle never believed that, and the more I learnt of the case, I didn't either.
Russell was very close to his Uncle Gary. This is Gary with Alfred. And what did your Uncle Gary think had happened to him then?
All he knew is that he saw his dad on the night of the disappearance, and then the next day he never saw him again.
Russell, a champion pigeon fancier like his granddad, has swapped racing pigeons for keeping quails. He's now driven by a new purpose, to try to find out what happened to his granddad, Alfred Swinscoe.
I remember Uncle Gary dying, and the first thing after the shock that came to my mind, well, what happens now? What happens about Grandad? What can I do?
When Alfred went missing, life in pit villages revolved around the mines. And after most shifts, Pinxton's miners would pile into one of the village's thriving pubs. Brenda Kelly was one of Alfred's neighbours.
You know, when they were going in the morning, 5:30, 8 whistling. And then, when they were coming back home, they were still whistling. You say, what manners about? Must have got too. Yeah, it was marvellous.
It was a typical mining village where people lived in each other's pockets, basically. It was a very, very close-knit community.
Nearly all Pinxton's pubs have since closed down. The Miners' Arms is now a family home. But this is where, 57 years ago, Alfred was out having a drink with his 2 sons and friends. It would be his last.
Uncle Gary always used to say, you know, Dad gave me a 10-bob note to go and get a drink. And he says, I went to the bar and I turned round to glance where Dad was, and he says, I saw him leaving the pub. And that was the last sight he ever saw of him, his dad walking out the pub. He vanished into thin air, basically. It was just socialising 1 minute and then gone.
Human remains have been found in a field in Sutton-in-Ashfield, A large cordon in place is expected to remain for the next 7 days.
We know this discovery will cause considerable concern in the local community.
I want to go back to where Alfred's remains were found. I'm on my way to speak to a local farmer. He'd hired someone to dig a trench in one of his fields and remembers getting a panicked phone call.
They said you'd better come up here quick, but it was a bit of a joker, this chap, so I didn't believe him. He insisted I went. He said, no, I'm not messing about now, you need to come up here straight away.
When you phoned 999, what did you say?
I think we've dug up some human remains, we've dug some body parts up. There were bones, but there was parts of clothing around them as well, shoes and socks. Yeah, it was quite shocking.
Police couldn't work out whose remains they were. Could the socks be a clue? They turned to local people for answers, putting out appeals on social media.
I looked at the socks and I had this incredible flashback that it was shouting at me as saying, you've wore these socks as a boy. When a small boy puts a man's sock on, the heel comes right up the back of the calf. I thought, yeah, I've obviously wore Grandad's socks. I got in touch with the police and I told them I'd lost Grandad and he matched to the description.
2 distinctive socks and a shoe that had been found with the remains were recognised by Alfred's grandson, Russell Lowbridge, and after further DNA tests, it was confirmed the remains are those of Alfred Swinscoe.
I was kind of shocked and relieved and proud of myself because I'd found Grandad. After all these years, I'd found him. I found him not just for himself, but for Uncle Gary, for the family.
Alfred Swinscoe, Grandad, missing for more than half a century, had finally been found. But that was just the start of a new mystery.
We still don't have the answers we desperately need. Please help us understand what happened.
What happened to Russell's Grandad that night was violent and brutal. He was beaten and stabbed.
He did put up a brave struggle. He's got signs of a broken fist, as if he'd given somebody a right good left hook in his defence. That's the way I visualise it. And before they probably knocked him to the floor and then attacked him with a spade. You get all these visions in your head.
It was at the Miners' Arms Alfred's family last remember seeing him. His remains were found just over 6 miles away across the county border and buried in a farmer's field. Peter Bray worked on some of the biggest murder cases in the region.
I think you've certainly got to start with the pub and the occupants of the pub. His son, the son's friend, and other people in the pub. You can't go back very easily at all, but you would certainly start at the pub.
So what stories have been passed down to Russell about what happened at the end of that night in the Miners' Arms?
Uncle Gary had been out on the night with a friend, a lifelong friend, and they'd been drinking, and they came back to socialise with his dad. When Uncle Gary turned around, he saw his dad leaving, being followed by this friend.
But who was that friend? He always reminded Russell of a particularly unpleasant character from the big screen.
Basically, I'd say, go back to a famous old film called The Hell Drivers.
If you think you're good enough to sit in my place, you have to prove it.
Thick, burly set, very aggressive.
basically the type of person he was in my eyes. Yeah, very violent and aggressive. Yes.
I need to find out more about this family friend, the Burley man. But first, I want to know what the pub, the Miners, was like. So I've come to meet Sam Marshall, who was chair of Pinxton Parish Council, knows all about the village's history, the Miners, and its fights.
There was one time in Miners, somebody got through the window. You know, and the window went, the whole frame and everything went, not just the glass, the whole frame went. That's the sort of place Pinxton was. But next morning that was it. It was done, dusted.
So do you think somebody would have known something?
You'd think somebody would, yes.
Beaten somebody up and stabbed them?
Yes.
Outside the Miners?
Yeah.
You'd think somebody would know?
You'd expect somebody to know.
Do you have any answers about a mystery spanning nearly 60 years?
First this lunchtime, police have confirmed that they've identified 2 suspects over the murder of a father of 6 who was killed 57 years ago.
I was called into Nottinghamshire Police Headquarters for an exclusive interview. The Assistant Chief Constable Rob Griffin wanted to tell me about a major update that no one saw coming.
Had those 2 people been alive today, they most certainly would have been arrested and interviewed at a police station.
2 suspects, no names, but the police released details that offer plenty of leads.
One of the males we know was a Pinxton man. We know from our records that he had a history of violence and was used to use the Miners' arms. He was known to have a vehicle.
And there's a final piece of information that stands out. An attack on a Pinxton man in April 1966, just 1 year before Alfred was killed.
In the assault case that this individual is convicted of, there were some quite serious injuries, and in part they are similar to the injuries that we now know Alfred sustained.
I think these details from the police could help me find out more about this suspect. So I've been going through every newspaper report about assaults in Pinxton around this time. And look at this one that I've just found. It talks about a violent assault by a local man who owned a car. It says the man started hitting the victim, dragged him from the car, then kicked and beat him, left him bleeding profusely. And look at the date, April 1966, the date when police said their suspect was convicted of a violent assault. We know who this man is, and he's the family friend, the one that Russell was talking about, the Burley man who was in the pub with Alfred the night he disappeared. Now, I do know his name. He has since died. But to protect his family, we've decided not to name him. So, this man carried out a savage attack in April 1966, the year before Alfred was killed. I want to try to find the man injured in that attack, John Shawcroft. It's worth going and having a chat and just seeing whether he will talk to us, because I'm so intrigued to find out what happened that night. He remembers what happened on that night in April 1966. I'm surprised to find he says the police haven't spoken to him, but he is happy to talk to me about it. First, I want to show him that newspaper article I found from the time. It says here as well that he got out of the car, dragged Shawcroft out and struck him again in the face. Shawcroft fell to the ground and he was kicked as he lay.
Oh, I know I kicked, yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember that, yeah. I can remember kicking him that way. Just lay there, hardly.
And you were in hospital for 2 weeks?
About a fortnight, I think. Something like that. Talking, the next thing, bang. That's all I can remember. My mate thought, please, I'm out on the floor, I didn't wear a war.
John's attacker was convicted of malicious wounding, one of the most serious violent offences in our legal system. He wasn't stabbed, Alfred was. But police say some of John's other injuries were similar. I've come to speak to two men who knew Alfred and drank in the Miners' Arms. Fred and Derek also clearly remember the man who attacked John, the burly Pinxton man who owned a car. It's hard to imagine now, but having a car was unusual in the village in 1967 and sticks in people's minds.
Was it a big deal then to have a car then?
Yeah, it was actually. Yeah.
As we're talking, Fred tells me about a car journey he took with the burly man around the time Alfred went missing. Fred says the man tried to befriend him out of the blue and wanted to take him to a pub in another village.
So did he just turn up and ask
you out?
He just
turned up, you know, and he just asked me if I wanted to go out, like, you know, and I thought, well, spin round in a car.
Fred says the man took him on a high-speed drive near where Alfred's remains were found and said something that has stayed with Fred to this day.
He said something like, these woods on the right-hand side, and something about you could soon hide somewhere up there. Yeah, he did. But I never thought nothing of it, you know what I mean?
Of course you wouldn't. Why would you?
It was so strange. Why would anybody say that to you?
Well, you wouldn't. You'd say, oh, look at flowers in that wood there, or, you know, you get conkers out of that wood, or whatever. Yeah. You wouldn't say, oh, that's a nice place to hide somewhere.
Fred says earlier this year he responded to a police appeal for information to tell them what he knew about the suspect.
I rung the police up. They said, we don't want to know now. We know who they were and they're dead. So I said, you don't want to know who I think did it then? And they says, no, and put the phone down.
What did you make of that?
I thought it was dead strange.
We've established the man who took Fred in his car and hospitalised John Shawcroft has a criminal past. He was accused of various crimes, including theft, and was jailed for 6 months. So, we now know one of the police suspects, the burly man, was a family friend of Alfred's. He was with Alfred and his sons in the pub the night of the disappearance. And, as well as a history of violence, he was one of the few people in the village with a car. But knocking on doors and speaking to people, I've been told something even more significant.
I've just spoken to someone who says they also knew the burly man, the police suspect. They didn't want to come on camera and talk to me, but they said he had a short fuse, he was violent, and he was at the Miners' Arms pub the night Alfred Swinscoe disappeared. And they also told me his name was given to the police at the time, back in 1967.
If that's correct, the police had the burly man's name more than 50 years ago. But remember then, it wasn't a murder investigation. Alfred had merely gone missing.
If I'm honest, back in the 60s, it was the mindset was probably the missing person will turn up. Let's wait until they turn up before we look into it in more depth.
So it wouldn't be unusual if the family did report Alfred Swinscoe as missing, that actually the police wouldn't take it too seriously at that time?
No, it wouldn't, I'm afraid. And it may be that again was the mindset then, that, well, he's gone, he's cleared off.
I've spent more than a year talking to neighbours, family members, and people who were around at the time. And I've managed to find lots of significant information about that first suspect. But remember, the police have identified 2 suspects. So what about the second man? Well, unlike suspect 1, the police haven't given any clues about him. But thanks to information I've gathered, I understand this second suspect was also a local man and was known to Alfred and his family. The police haven't named him either, and again, for the sake of his surviving relatives, we've also taken the decision not to. The police say the passage of time has frustrated their search for the truth.
It makes it really difficult because we haven't got access to some of that evidence that we so routinely rely on now. CCTV, number plate recognition, a lot of the forensic, telephones, all those other data opportunities.
Of course, the police could have more evidence than we're aware of, but from what I've found, the case against the suspects is circumstantial and far from concrete. Based on what we do know, could it be enough for the police to have brought them in?
If they were alive today, they would be arrested, interviewed, and asked for an explanation of a variety of different events.
It's a few weeks since I've seen Russell, Alfred's grandson, and I want to show him what I've discovered. Firstly, about the Burley family friend.
We're just talking, and the next thing, bang. That's all I can remember. I can remember kicking me that way. Just lay there, I did.
So hearing that from John Shawcroft, who was friends with him beforehand and then out of the blue got really viciously attacked.
I'm not surprised. It was volatile. It was a time bomb.
I can see this is really difficult for Russell.
You're right.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's clearly a lot for him to take in, and we pause filming while he gets some air.
But yeah, I want to hear it. I want to hear everything.
You want to hear it?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Do you want to carry on?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Next, I show Russell what Fred Webster said about the drive he was taken on by the Burley man, and what happened when he tried to tell the police about it.
It said something like these woods on the right-hand side, and something about you could soon hide somewhere up there. I rung the police up. They said, we don't want to know now. We know who they were and they're dead. So I said, you don't want to know who I think did it then? And they says, no, and put the phone down.
What do you think about that?
Well, it don't seem right, does it? You know, people were offering the services and they were refusing it. They weren't even listening to them.
And what does it mean to you to find these answers?
Well, it means everything. They put an appeal out there for the public to help, and to me, they're just snubbing them from what that chap experienced.
And how important do you think that bit of information is?
Well, to me, it was very important. That has stuck in that man's head all those years, and it triggered him to report it when they put out the appeal, but yet they snubbed him.
Are you upset more wasn't done by the police at the time? If they had that name?
Yes, but from what I can gather, they never saw it as a murder case. It was a missing person. I suppose initially they might have had a search for him, to no avail.
I've spoken to other members of Alfred's family who told me they're also angry. Angry that police didn't do more when he went missing. The discovery of Alfred Swinscoe's remains unearthed new information and 2 suspects. He's now buried alongside his family, sharing a plot with his son Gary. Through the childhood memory of a pair of socks, Russell has been able to end part of a search that has haunted his family for more than half a century.
He was so close to home, yet so far. The times I've drove by over the years and drove straight past him, you know, and he's been shouting out to us, you know, I'm here, I'm here.
Having found some answers, Russell now wants to move on.
I can't afford to let this plague my life any longer. It needs to finally go to bed now and be satisfied that we've got Grandad back. It is tragic to find out how he died, though. He didn't deserve to die like that. Nobody deserves to die like that. But we've got him back, and we don't have to wonder anymore.